Alright, here's the revised passage with correct punctuation, corrected spelling, and replaced character names. Keeping American English. I thought going home for a few days would be the perfect escape. A break from stress, from the noise, from everything weighing on my mind. But I was wrong, because when my little brother, Alex, caught me in the act, I never imagined my quiet vacation would spiral into something far more intense, far more complicated, and far crazier than I ever expected. I hadn't planned on coming home for vacation. In fact, I had every intention of staying back at my apartment, enjoying the rare silence away from my hectic college life. But then Mom called, her voice warm, laced with a guilt-inducing softness only a mother could master. It's been months since you visited. Your brother, Alex, keeps asking about you. That part caught me off guard. My little brother asking about me? We weren't exactly distant, but time had made us strangers in ways we never acknowledged. So, with a duffel bag lazily slung over my shoulder, I stepped back into the house I had grown up in, inhaling the familiar scent of home, wood polish, Mom's subtle floral air freshener, and something vaguely like warm bread. Everything was just as I remembered, yet something felt different. Maybe it was me. Look who finally decided to come back, Alex said from the couch, his eyes flicking up from his phone. He had grown, not just in height, though that was apparent, but in presence. His voice had settled deeper, carrying something new beneath it, something I couldn't quite place. He wasn't a kid anymore. Yeah, I muttered, dropping my bag near the stairs. Thought I'd grace you all with my presence. Alex snorted but didn't push further, his eyes following me as I moved. There was something in his stare, an intensity, a quiet curiosity. Maybe it was just the usual awkwardness of brothers who hadn't been in the same space for too long. Maybe I was overthinking it. Dinner was the same as always, Mom chatting about neighborhood gossip, Dad barely looking up from his plate, and Alex throwing in the occasional sarcastic remark. But I could feel his gaze flickering toward me when he thought I wouldn't notice. And that feeling, that strange awareness, settled into my bones, lingering even as I went upstairs to my old bedroom. The room was untouched, save for a thin layer of dust on the shelves. It was strange being back in this space, surrounded by remnants of my teenage years, posters I never took down, books I never finished, a bed that somehow felt smaller than I remembered. A soft knock on the door pulled me from my thoughts. You staying long? Alex's voice. I turned, leaning against the dresser. Not sure. A week, maybe. Just needed a break from everything. Alex lingered in the doorway, arms crossed, an unreadable expression settling on his face. College that bad? I shrugged. Just loud sometimes. You need to step back. He nodded slowly, but his gaze didn't waver. And in that moment, standing there under his silent scrutiny, I realized just how much he had changed. The kid I left behind wasn't a kid anymore. There was something else, something in the way he looked at me now. Less like an annoying older brother. More like, I couldn't put my finger on it. The tension wasn't immediate, nor was it obvious. It was a slow crawl. A creeping thing settling between us over the next few days. It was in the way he moved when we passed each other in the hall. Too close, his shoulder brushing mine when there was plenty of space. It was in the way his eyes lingered. Too observant, too knowing. I started catching myself noticing things I shouldn't. The way his voice had changed. The way he carried himself with a confidence that hadn't been there before. I shouldn't have been thinking about it. But once the thought was there, I couldn't unthink it. One evening, we were in the living room. Just the two of us. Mom and Dad had gone out, leaving us alone. The TV was on. Some random show playing in the background. But neither of us were really watching. I could feel the weight of his presence beside me. The quiet tension that had been building over the past few days reaching a point where even silence felt charged. Do you ever miss being home? He asked suddenly. I glanced at him, caught off guard. Sometimes, but you know how it is. You get used to being on your own. He hummed in response, his fingers tapping idly against the armrest. I bet you get up to a lot of things living alone. Something about the way he said it made my stomach tighten. The words were innocent, but the way they rolled off his tongue wasn't. I swallowed, forcing a smirk. Yeah, sure, you know, wild parties, constant studying, the usual college life. Alex chuckled, shaking his head. That's not what I meant. My pulse skipped just for a second. Then what did you mean? He tilted his head slightly. like he was debating how far to push. Then, with an easy shrug, he muttered, "Nothing, just wondering." I exhaled, turning my attention back to the screen. But I could feel his stare on the side of my face. My mind should have let it go, should have dismissed it, but it didn't. Later that night, lying in my old bed, I found myself wide awake. Every little moment over the past few days replayed in my mind like a loop. The way he looked at me, the way his voice lowered when he spoke to me, the way he seemed to hover, testing the waters, waiting for something. I turned onto my side, staring at the ceiling. Maybe it was just my imagination. Maybe I was making something out of nothing. But something told me I wasn't. That thought lingered, embedding itself deeper than I wanted to admit. And the worst part? I didn't mind it. The days passed, but something felt different. Maybe it was just the natural adjustment of being home again. But I could feel a shift in the air. Alex and I had always gotten along fine. But now we were spending more time together. Small, seemingly innocent moments that shouldn't have meant anything. But somehow they did. At first, it was subtle. Sitting closer than necessary on the couch. Rushing past each other in the hallway when there was plenty of space to avoid contact. I wasn't sure if I was imagining it or if he was doing it on purpose. But every time our arms grazed, every time our knees touched under the dining table, I felt a jolt of awareness rush through me. I told myself it was nothing. Just being hyper-aware because I wasn't used to having him around anymore. But then the comments started. "You're looking different these days," he said one afternoon, his voice light but his eyes steady on me. "Yeah? In what way?" I played it off, keeping my tone casual. Alex shrugged, his lips twitching in something that wasn't quite a smile. "I don't know, just different." He left it at that. But the way he said it stuck with me. Then there were the looks. The kind of stares that lasted just a second too long, lingering past the point of being casual. I'd catch him watching me sometimes. Expression unreadable. And instead of looking away like any normal person would, he held it, like he was waiting for me to say something. I didn't. I acted like I didn't notice. But at night, lying in bed, I did notice. I couldn't stop thinking about it. Every little brush, every too long glance. It was ridiculous. Really, I was overanalyzing, and I never knew I would be caught by him. Yet, one evening, we were in the kitchen, the space between us feeling smaller than it should. He was standing near the counter, reaching for something in the cabinet above. I moved past him to grab a glass. And in that split second, his hand brushed against my waist. Barely there, barely intentional, but it lingered just a second too long. I stiffened, not in a bad way. More like I was waiting for something else to happen. Alex didn't move away immediately. His fingers curled slightly, like he was debating something before he finally pulled back. "Sorry," he muttered, but his voice didn't sound apologetic at all. I didn't know what to say, so I said nothing. That night, my mind was restless. I kept thinking about the way he looked at me, the way his voice dropped lower when he spoke. I had always been the one who was older, the one who was supposed to be in control. But now, it felt like the power was shifting, like he was the one pushing boundaries, testing me, waiting for my reaction. And the worst part? I didn't hate it. I didn't. I felt something popping inside me. Then, just as I was about to drift off, lost in my thoughts, my door creaked open. I turned my head toward the sound, expecting Mom or Dad, but it was Alex. He leaned against the doorframe, arms crossed, a lazy smirk playing on his lips. "You look tense." My stomach flipped. I swallowed. "What?" He tilted his head, stepping further inside, not bothering to close the door behind him. "You've been acting weird." "I haven't," I lied, forcing myself to sit up. He hummed, unconvinced. "I think you have." Silence stretched between us, the space between him and the doorway feeling too open, too dangerous. He wasn't supposed to be in here. Not like this, not with that look on his face. Yet, he was, and I didn't tell him to leave. He watched me for a minute or two, then left me alone again. The tension had been simmering for days, now threading itself through every interaction, every glance, every word exchanged between us. It wasn't subtle anymore. It was there, undeniable, pressing down on me even when I tried to ignore it. Alex wasn't backing off either. If anything, he was getting bolder. It started with little things, standing too close behind me when I was cooking, reaching past me for something and letting his fingers drag a little too long against my arm. The way he would say my name, slow, Deliberate, like he was testing the weight of it on his tongue. The smirks, the comments, the way he looked at me as if he was waiting for me to slip up and acknowledge what was happening between us. And then Mom and Dad announced they'd be going away for the weekend. Just a little getaway, Mom said at dinner, smiling as she reached for more mashed potatoes. It's been forever since we had time to ourselves. Dad nodded, barely looking up from his phone. You boys can handle a couple of days on your own, right? Of course, I said quickly, keeping my voice as neutral as possible. Alex, across the table, let out a quiet chuckle, low enough that only I caught it. When I glanced up, he was watching me, something unreadable flickering in his gaze. The house felt different once they were gone. It was too quiet, too empty, as if the air itself had shifted. I tried to distract myself, keeping busy with random things, watching TV, scrolling on my phone, anything to keep my mind from wandering into dangerous territory. But Alex wasn't making it easy. Enjoying the silence? He asked that evening, dropping onto the couch beside me. I shrugged, eyes still on the screen. Yeah, feels weird though, he hummed, stretching his arms over his head, his shirt riding up just enough to expose a sliver of skin. Guess we'll have to entertain ourselves somehow. My grip on the remote tightened. I willed myself not to look, not to react. He wasn't subtle anymore. Later that night, when I was in the kitchen grabbing a drink, he appeared behind me. I heard him before I saw him. His footsteps soft on the tiled floor. What are you doing? I asked without turning. Just watching, he replied, his voice too casual. I finally looked over my shoulder. He was leaning against the counter, arms folded, his head tilted slightly like he was studying me. What? I asked. Alex smirked. Nothing, just thinking about. He shrugged, but there was something almost playful in the way he stepped closer. Like he was daring me to move away. I didn't. That was my first mistake. The second was not stopping him when he nudged me lightly with his shoulder. Testing the waters, seeing how far he could push. You used to be fun, he murmured, almost under his breath. That made me turn fully to face him. What's that supposed to mean? Alex's grin widened, and before I could react, he shoved me, not hard, just enough to throw me off balance for a second. What the hell? I muttered, steadying myself. He laughed. You're so serious all the time now. You used to mess around. I rolled my eyes. I'm not wrestling you, Alex. Scared you'll lose? He scoffed. You wish. The challenge was clear in his eyes before he lunged at me. I barely had time to react before he tackled me, his arms wrapping around my torso as he tried to knock me off my feet. Instinct kicked in, and I pushed back, grabbing his arm to throw him off balance. It was meant to be playful. That's all it was, until we hit the couch, my back pressing into the cushions. And suddenly he wasn't moving. Neither was I. His hands were still gripping my arms. Our legs tangled together in the awkward mess of the struggle. But the struggle wasn't happening anymore. We were too close. I could feel his breath against my face. Warm, steady. His chest was rising and falling against mine. Too slow, too deliberate. His fingers flexed slightly around my wrist. Not enough to hurt, but enough that I felt it. I should have moved. I should have laughed it off. Pushed him away. Made some dumb joke about how I clearly won. But I didn't. I just lay there, staring up at him. And for the first time, I saw it, not just in the way he looked at me, but in the way he wasn't looking away. He knew. He had known for a while now. And now so did I. Then, after what felt like an eternity, he finally smirked and let go, rolling off me like nothing had happened. But it had. The moment replayed over and over in my head for the rest of the night. I couldn't sleep. I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, trying to rationalize what had happened. It was just a stupid wrestling match. It was nothing, except it wasn't. I didn't stop thinking about it. The way his body felt pressed against mine. The weight of him. The way he had looked at me right before he pulled away. I wasn't supposed to be thinking about it, but I was. And later that night, when I was alone in my room, I found myself unable to resist the tension that had been building for days. I don't know why I did it while thinking about Alex, but I did. I let myself give in, thinking the house was quiet, that Alex was asleep. I just didn't know he was awake. I didn't know he could hear me. My breathing deepened as my thoughts spiraled. The heat in my chest spread, my body tensing, a dull ache growing inside me. I needed an outlet, a way to shake this feeling off before it swallowed me whole. I turned onto my stomach, pressing my forehead against the pillow. Exhaling sharply. It was fine. No one was awake. The house was mine for the night. Or so I thought. Just as my body fully relaxed into the moment, a faint shift in the air made my skin prickle. A presence. A feeling like I wasn't alone. I froze. The room was dark, but not pitch black. The faint sliver of hallway light cast a soft glow through the doorway. Enough to see movement. A shadow. My breath hitched. My heart pounded in my chest. Slowly. Too afraid to move too fast, I turned my head toward the door. And there he was, standing in the doorway. Alex. My stomach dropped for a second. Maybe two. We just stared at each other. No words. No reaction. Just the crushing weight of realization settling between us like a heavy fog. My mind scrambled for an excuse. For something to say. Something to do. But I couldn't move. Couldn't speak. And the worst part? Neither did he. He wasn't leaving. He wasn't looking away. He wasn't even shocked. His face was unreadable, but his body was completely still. His hands gripping the frame of the door like he was anchoring himself in place. My pulse thundered in my ears. I should have been embarrassed. Ashamed. I should have said something. Done something. Anything to break the suffocating silence between us. But I didn't. And neither did he. Seconds stretched into eternity. Then, after what felt like a lifetime, Alex tilted his head slightly, his voice breaking the quiet like a blade through glass. I've heard you do this many times before. The words sent a shockwave through me. I sucked in a breath, my body tensing, my heart hammering in my chest. He said it so casually, like it was nothing, like this wasn't something that should send me spiraling into a panic. I swallowed hard, trying to find my voice, but nothing came out. Alex took a slow step forward, his expression calm. Too calm. He was waiting for my reaction, watching me with an intensity that made my skin burn. My voice cracked, and I clenched my jaw, forcing myself to sit up. I don't know what you're talking about. Alex's lips curved slightly, not a full smirk, but something close to it. Sure you don't. His tone was unreadable. He wasn't teasing. He wasn't angry. He was just stating a fact. I gripped the edge of the blanket, my knuckles turning white. How long? I finally asked, my voice quieter than I intended. Alex shrugged, leaning against the doorframe. A while. A while. The words sank into me, heavy and unshakable. I had been careless, too comfortable, too used to thinking I was alone. But I wasn't. I had never been. My entire body felt hot. But not from embarrassment. It was something else, something deeper, something I didn't want to name. Alex exhaled through his nose, watching me for another agonizingly long moment before he finally pushed off the doorframe. Well, he murmured, turning slightly like he was about to leave. But then he paused, glancing over his shoulder, his gaze locked onto mine, something unreadable flickering behind his eyes. Then, with the faintest hint of amusement, he said, "Don't stop on my account." And then he was gone. The door stayed open. The weight of his words hung in the air long after he left. I sat there, my pulse still racing, my body stiff, the warmth in my stomach refusing to fade. I should have been relieved that he left. But I wasn't. I wasn't sure what I felt. All I knew was that this changed everything. I sat there in the dark, heart still pounding in my chest, my mind a tangled mess of thoughts I didn't want to acknowledge. Alex's words echoed in my head, looping like a song I couldn't turn off. I've heard you do this many times before. He had left after saying that. But the air still felt charged with something I couldn't shake. My body felt too warm, too restless, like I had been caught in the middle of something I couldn't explain. I ran a hand down my face, exhaling shakily. What the hell just happened? Had I misread everything? Had I really been that careless? No, this wasn't about carelessness. This was something else. Alex had known, not just tonight, but for a while. He had hurt me more than once. That realization settled in my stomach like a weight I couldn't lift. And the way he had said it, calm, steady, almost amused, like he had been waiting for me to figure it out. I swallowed hard. But before I could even process it, the door creaked. I stiffened. My breath caught in my throat. Alex was back. He leaned against the doorframe, arms crossed, eyes dark with something unreadable. He didn't say anything at first, just stood there watching me, letting the silence stretch between us like a rope pulled too tight. My pulse pounded in my ears. "What are you?" "You didn't finish," he interrupted, his voice low. Measured. I froze. He stepped inside, slow and deliberate, his expression still unreadable, but his eyes were saying something else entirely. My throat felt dry. I shifted on the bed, suddenly hyper-aware of everything. The way the sheets were slightly disheveled, the heat lingering in my body, the air in the room thick with something unspoken. Alex tilted his head slightly. I could help, if you wouldn't mind. I exhaled sharply, gripping the edge of the blanket. What? His lips twitched, but he wasn't smirking. Not this time. You heard me. I swallowed hard. Alex, don't, he said, cutting me off again. His voice was quiet but firm. He took another step closer. The space between us shrank. I could feel the weight of his presence. The way the air in the room had changed. Charged. Waiting. You think I don't notice? His voice was softer now. Almost curious. I shook my head, willing my mind to catch up. Notice what? His lips twitched. You. The way you react. The way you avoid looking at me too long. Like if you do something might slip. I felt heat creep up my neck. You're imagining things. Alex huffed a quiet laugh. Am I? He took another step forward. Because I think you knew exactly what you were doing this whole time. My jaw tightened. Alex, don't. His voice cut through the space between us, making me inhale sharply. He wasn't playing around anymore. His usual smirks, his teasing remarks, all gone. This was something else entirely. I tried to get up, to put space between us, but he stepped in my way, blocking my path. You don't have to pretend. Alex, he said, quieter now. Not with me. I stared at him, my pulse hammering in my ears. This was it, the moment where everything either unraveled completely or changed forever. For a long time, neither of us spoke. The tension was thick enough to suffocate. His eyes searched mine, looking for something, maybe permission, maybe acknowledgement, and for the first time, I didn't look away. Alex's breath hitched just slightly, barely noticeable. See, he murmured, you're not stopping me. I wanted to. I didn't, and in that split second, we both understood something we hadn't dared to say out loud. The tension finally snapped. I didn't know who moved first. Maybe neither of us did. Maybe we were always standing too close, always teetering on the edge of something inevitable. The moment was heavy, electric, charged with everything we'd been avoiding for days, weeks, maybe even longer. The air between us felt like a live wire, buzzing with unspoken words, emotions neither of us had dared to name. Alex's breath was shallow, his chest rising and falling just slightly faster than before. His eyes flickered over my face, searching, hesitating, waiting. I could feel it, the pull, the invisible force that had been there all along, growing stronger every time we lingered in the same space, every time a glance lasted too long, every time silence spoke louder than word. I should have stepped back. I should have laughed it off, said something to break the tension, to remind us both that this wasn't happening, that it was just our minds playing tricks on us. But I didn't, because it was happening. Alex swallowed hard, his throat bobbing. This is crazy, he muttered, barely above a whisper. Yeah, I said, my voice just as quiet. I know. And yet, neither of us moved away. The distance between us was nearly gone now. A breath, a heartbeat, a single thought away from something we couldn't undo. His fingers twitched at his side, like he wanted to reach for me but wasn't sure if he should. The hesitation was written all over his face. But so was something else. Something raw, something real. I felt my pulse in every part of my body. I could hear it pounding in my ears, in my fingertips, in my chest. The space between us was suffocating, intoxicating. I took a slow, steady breath, trying to ground myself, but all I could focus on was the warmth radiating from his skin, the sharpness of his gaze, the way his lips parted just slightly, like he was waiting for something, like he was daring me to make the next move. I don't know what to do with this, he admitted finally, his voice rough, almost strained. Neither did I, but I knew one thing for sure. I didn't want to walk away. Alex shifted his weight, and for the briefest moment, his fingers brushed against mine. It was barely there, a whisper of contact, but it sent a jolt through me like a spark hitting dry air, igniting something I hadn't realized was flammable. We did it. The world around us seemed to slow, the walls of the room closing in, making the moment feel even more suffocatingly intimate. His breathing deepened, mirroring mine, matching the rhythm neither of us had said on purpose. I wasn't sure how long we stood there, caught in the storm of everything we weren't saying. But I knew one thing for certain. Neither of us was ready to walk away. Not anymore. There was no shame, no disgust. The air between us felt heavier than ever. Like we had stepped past an invisible threshold. And there was no turning back now. I should have felt conflicted. Maybe I did somewhere deep inside. But in that moment, caught in the weight of his stare, I didn't stop. I didn't mind. The seconds stretched, thick with everything we weren't saying. Everything that had been simmering between us for days. For weeks, maybe longer. Then a noise, a sharp, unexpected sound from downstairs. My stomach twisted as reality slammed back into me like a cold wave. Alex jerked slightly, his breathing still uneven, his body stiffening as the sound settled between us. For a split second, neither of us moved, both frozen in place, like the moment could still hold itself together if we didn't acknowledge the intrusion. Then another sound, the unmistakable creak of the front door opening. I sucked in a sharp breath. Mom and Dad were back. Alex's eyes widened slightly, and in an instant, the weight of what had just happened crashed down on both of us. Without a word, we pulled apart, moving too fast, too suddenly, like two guilty criminals scrambling for cover. I barely had time to process before I heard Mom's voice drifting up the stairs. "Boys, we're home early." Crap, I turned to Alex, my heart still hammering. His face was unreadable, but I could see the tension in his jaw, the way his hands curled into fists at his sides, like he was still holding on to something from before. He exhaled sharply, running a hand through his hair before muttering, "We have to act normal." Normal? Right. Except nothing about this was normal anymore. I swallowed hard, forcing myself to breathe, forcing myself to push down the storm raging inside me. Footsteps echoed up the stairs. And before I could fully react, Alex grabbed my wrist and yanked me down onto the bed beside him. "Alex," I hissed under my breath. "Just act like we were asleep," he whispered, voice urgent. I barely had time to react before he pulled the blanket over both of us, positioning himself in a way that made it look casual, but I could still feel the residual heat of everything that had just happened hanging in the air between us. And then the door swung open. Mom peeked inside, looking pleasantly surprised to see us both on the bed, the dim light from the hallway casting a soft glow into the room. Her lips curled into a small smile. "Oh," she said, her voice quiet as if not wanting to wake us. "Look at that, you two must have been catching up." Dad appeared behind her, glancing in briefly before shrugging. "Didn't expect them to be asleep already," he murmured. "Guess they still get along after all." Mom chuckled lightly, then whispered, "Let's not wake them." She reached for the door handle and gently pulled it shut. We both stayed completely still until we heard the sound of their footsteps retreating down the hall. And then, finally, I exhaled. Alex was the first to move, shifting slightly beside me, but he didn't get up, didn't leave. For a long time, neither of us spoke. Everything feels different now. Even the silence wasn't the same. I turned my head slightly, my eyes catching the faint glow of the hallway light seeping in through the crack under the door. My mind was still reeling, trying to process what had almost happened, what had actually happened, and what it meant moving forward. But more than that, I couldn't ignore the fact that Alex was still right there, his presence steady, solid, like some part of him was still refusing to break the moment completely. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, he let out a quiet breath. "Let's talk about this tomorrow." From that night on, everything changed. It wasn't just the silence between us. It was the way we moved around each other. The way the weight of unspoken words hung in the air like a storm waiting to break. Nothing had to be said out loud, because we both knew. The next morning, I woke up to find Alex still beside me. His body turned slightly toward mine, his breathing slow and steady. He hadn't left. For a split second, I let myself watch him, my mind still tangled in the events of the night before. It would have been easy to pretend it hadn't happened, to chalk it up to exhaustion or misplaced emotions. But the problem was, I didn't want to pretend. I turned onto my back, staring at the ceiling, my heart strangely calm despite the storm brewing inside me. Alex stirred beside me, stretching slightly before his eyes blinked open. The moment he saw me awake, a small, knowing smile tugged at the corner of his lips. "You sleep okay?" he murmured, voice rough with sleep. I swallowed. "Yeah." His gaze lingered for a moment. Heavy, unreadable. "Good." he said simply before sitting up and running a hand through his hair. Guess we should get up before Mom starts asking questions. I nodded, but my body felt like it was moving on autopilot. My mind still stuck in the space between last night and now. We got through breakfast without a word about it. But everything was different. The way Alex's eyes met mine across the table. The way our hands brushed when reaching for something. Neither of us pulling away as fast as we should have. The way he smirked when no one was looking. Like he was enjoying the shift. Testing the waters. Waiting for me to react. And the worst part? I didn't hate it. If anything, I was waiting too. That night, when the house was quiet again, I lay awake, my pulse thrumming as I stared at my bedroom ceiling. And then the door creaked open. I didn't even have to turn my head. I already knew who it was. Alex didn't say anything at first. He just leaned against the doorframe, watching me the way he had last night. Then finally, he smirked. I hope you don't mind if I listen again. A slow exhale left my lips. This time I didn't look away. And this time, I didn't mind at all. We did it again. There were no grand confessions. No dramatic moments of acknowledgement. Just an unspoken understanding that lingered in the air between us. Reshaping every glance, every interaction, every breath we shared in the same space. Alex didn't act any differently. Not in a way anyone else would notice. He was still himself. Casual, confident, teasing in the way he always had been. But to me, everything had changed. I noticed the way he moved around me. How he stood a little closer than necessary. How his hand would brush mine when we passed each other in the hall. His fingers grazing my wrist just long enough for it to mean something. I noticed the way he looked at me. Not just looking, but watching, studying, waiting, and most of all, I noticed how I wasn't pulling away. If anything, I was waiting too. The tension that had once been subtle was now something neither of us was trying to hide. It was there, undeniable, hovering between us like a quiet storm. Meals at the dinner table felt different. Mom and Dad didn't notice a thing. They laughed, talked about their day, asked about my plans once vacation was over. But I could feel Alex's gaze on me, flickering over whenever I wasn't looking, like he was testing how much I could take before I reacted. At night, I lay awake in bed, feeling his presence even when he wasn't there. But sometimes he was. I heard his footsteps pause outside my door once, long enough that I knew he was standing there. I didn't call out to him, didn't ask what he was doing. I just let the moment stretch, thick with something unspoken, and then he walked away. But some nights the door creaked open. Alex would lean against the frame, arms crossed, his expression unreadable. "You're still awake," he murmured. A beat of silence. Then the same cycle happened again. But I know now everything won't be the same between us again, no matter how much I try to act normal. I feel it, the shift, the unspoken tension lingering in the air waiting for one of us to acknowledge it. What would you do in my place? Would you let your feelings control you? Let me know in the comments. Quote,